All right, let's jump straight into this explainer. We're unpacking an incredibly concise 10-word philosophy that will absolutely reshape how you push through friction. If you've ever hit a wall during a grueling project, a tough workout, or honestly just a long, exhausting day, you know exactly how overwhelming that urge to quit can be. Today, we're breaking down a mindset shift so simple, yet so ridiculously powerful, it literally changes the very definition of what a finish line is. We're going to explore the fundamental difference between the sensation of fatigue and the absolute reality of completion. Just 10 words. Don't stop when you're tired. Stop when you're done. That is our entire source material for today. But man, within these two short sentences lies a profound meditation on human endurance. It's not just some catchy slogan. It's a fundamental reprogramming of how we respond to physical and mental resistance. When we look at this phrase, we're actually looking at a complete operational manual for overcoming the biological and psychological triggers that constantly try to hold us back. First up, tired. Just think about the heavy, dragging weight of that word. We all know this feeling intimately, right? It's that familiar brain fog when you're trying to write something at 2 a.m. It's the intense burning in your lungs on the last mile of a run. It's that super persuasive voice in your head whispering, hey, you've done enough for today. But the core lesson we have to extract here is that tired is inherently unreliable. It's an emotion. It's a sensory feedback loop. And most importantly, it is an incredibly poor indicator of your actual capacity to keep going. Now contrast that with the sharp, absolute finality of this second concept, done. Done doesn't care how you feel. It doesn't negotiate with your fatigue or your stress levels. It is completely binary. You either are or you aren't. Done represents a factual, undeniable reality in the physical world. It totally strips away all the messy, subjective emotions that usually cloud our judgment when we're right in the middle of a difficult task. So, the 10-word mantra. This entire concept is basically a battleground. It pits the internal against the external. On one side, your body and mind are kind of colluding to make you comfortable, generating feelings of exhaustion just to convince you to stop. On the other side, the task itself just sits there, waiting to be completed. The core conflict we face every single day is deciding which of these two masters we're actually going to serve. Let's define tired. This illustrates the crux of that first sentence. Tiredness is merely a subjective, internal feeling. It is not an objective reality. It begs you to halt progress prematurely. Look, the human brain is hardwired for energy conservation. When you start exerting effort, your brain sends out distress signals, tiredness, way before you're actually out of energy. It's exactly like your car's low fuel light coming on when you still have a quarter tank left in there. It's an early warning system, sure, but we way too often mistake it for a hard, non-negotiable stop. To put that into perspective, fatigue often strikes when you still have a massive chunk of the journey left. When that wave of tiredness hits, which is often right around the 40% mark of your actual capacity, your brain tries its hardest to convince you the tank is completely empty. But the truth? The truth is that massive 60% push that remains. That proves the very moment you feel like quitting is rarely the moment you actually need to quit. There is vast, untapped potential lying just beyond that initial barrier of fatigue. Because of that, the text issues a direct, uncompromising command. Don't stop. You must deliberately ignore this false internal finish line. It's a pattern interrupt. When the feeling of being tired washes over you, your default habit loop tells you to rest. This text demands that you break that loop. It asks you to observe the fatigue, acknowledge that, yep, it's there, and then consciously decide that it does not possess the authority to halt your forward momentum. It's a radical act of taking back control from your transient feelings. Defining the finish line. Well, if we're going to completely discard tired as our stopping cue, we obviously need a replacement, right? We need a reliable metric that won't betray us when things get hard. This is where the mindset shift truly happens. We're transitioning away from feeling-based criteria for stopping straight over to fact-based criteria. And here is our fact. Done. The actual objective completion of the task at hand. The absolute crucial point here is that done is an objective state that exists completely independently of how exhausted you might feel. Think about writing a report. Done is when the final period is typed and the document is submitted. It is not when your eyes get heavy. It's not when you feel bored. By relying on this objective definition, you remove all ambiguity from your work. The criteria for success is no longer, did I try hard enough until I got tired? Actually, scratch that. It's simply, is the task objectively finished? Which brings us back to the phrase, stop when you're done. The source material anchors your stopping point to an external reality, entirely replacing the emotional trigger with a factual one. And it is incredibly freeing when you really think about it. You don't have to constantly assess your energy levels. You don't have to internally debate whether you've done enough for the day. The task itself dictates the timeline. You simply execute until the parameters of completion are met. This externalization of the finish line is quite literally the ultimate hack for consistent productivity and resilience. So we're really talking about internal versus external triggers. We're talking about the deep-seated signals that prompt a behavior. Throughout our lives, we are almost entirely conditioned to respond to internal triggers. We eat when we feel hungry, we sleep when we feel sleepy, and we stop working when we feel tired. But to achieve anything of high magnitude, this source text suggests we have to flip the script powerfully and intentionally, allowing external triggers, meaning the actual requirements of the goal, to drive our behavior instead. Putting these head-to-head, we're looking at a crystal-clear dichotomy. It's the vulnerability of yielding to an internal trigger versus the sheer discipline of adhering to an external one. Sentence 1 warns you against the trap. Sentence 2 provides the solution. If you let the internal trigger win, your output is always going to be wildly inconsistent. It'll fluctuate with your mood, your sleep quality, or even what you had for lunch. But if you lock onto that external trigger, your output becomes inevitable. It becomes steady, it becomes reliable. Breaking this down further, relying on fatigue guarantees failure because the false stop fluctuates constantly. One day, you might feel tired after an hour. The next day, maybe after 10 minutes. If you follow it, it inherently leads to incompletion. But the true stop is an absolute objective state. Because it doesn't change based on how you happen to be feeling at 3 p.m. on a Tuesday, aligning your actions with reality is the only logical path that consistently leads to success. All right. The ultimate mindset shift. Understanding the philosophy is one thing, but making it actionable is a whole different ballgame. We want to take these 10 words and turn them into a literal operating system for your daily tasks. So, how do we actually override the biological urge to quit? How do we rewire our brains to push past the tired phase and secure that done phase? The philosophy implies a very specific 3-step journey. Start the task, experience tiredness, reach done. Fatigue is just a milestone you pass along the way, not the end of the road. The magic really happens in that middle step. You have to expect the tiredness. Don't be surprised by it. Treat it as a completely normal, mandatory checkpoint on the road to completion. When the urge to stop arrives, you mentally check it off, like, yep, there's the tiredness, right on schedule, and then you proceed directly to the final step. You completely normalize the friction. So, the absolutely crucial point to take away from this explainer is that you possess the ability to decouple your actions from your immediate physical sensations. Your feelings are real, for sure, but they are not the boss of your actions. Completion is a measurable fact. By redefining your stopping point based on reality rather than just sensation, you unlock a level of endurance you likely never even knew you had. You take the steering wheel right back from your temporary discomfort. I want to leave you with a final, vital question. Ask yourself this the very next time you feel the urge to quit. Are you stopping because you're tired or because you're done? Memorize this question, print it out, make it the lock screen on your phone. The next time you are tempted to close the laptop early or drop the weights or walk away from a difficult conversation, pause and ask yourself this exact question. The honest answer will dictate whether you remain a prisoner to your fatigue or whether you finally push all the way through to done. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.